This is Iron Lateran. He is a realistic, medieval, lore-locked, hardcore Iron Man. This means that he can't use magic, can't runecraft, can't use any magical items, or teleports. My goal is to explore the world of Runescape as a scholar of literature and medieval lore and see how it stacks up to the real thing. I'll be doing this experiment as long as is needed, but in the meantime, I have monsters to slay, heretics to persecute, lessons to learn,
Pizza is not consistent with a medieval RPG.
and quests to complete. Enjoy.
You see this armor? You see this stuff? Studded leather armor? It's bullcrap. Okay. That was a little harsh. Studded leather armor and leather armor in general is a little problematic for a medieval style RPG. Why? Because leather armor didn't exist in the fantasy sense. Okay, if you take a look at any D&D manual, you're gonna find some hyper-sexed, over-the-top, kinky leather armor that's basically just a few straps of leather wrapped over the ultra-tight bodice of some ultra-hot woman. Okay? No. Alright, basically all you're doing with that type of leather armor in fantasy worlds is you're taking the skin of something else that you just killed with a sharp weapon and are putting it over your body and thinking that all of a sudden now that sharp weapon's not going to work anymore. No, it's dumb. Okay? Leather armor in the way that fantasy portrays it did not exist. Okay, anybody will tell you this. Go watch Lindy Page, go read a book, go look up forms of medieval armor, and you will never see fantasy leather armor, ever. Okay, what you will see are very big, chunky, ugly, puffy, quilt-like looking things filled with either scraps of metal or pockets of wool. Okay, they would have been skirted, so from your shoulders down to your knees would have been completely covered by this thick material that would have been leather as an adhesive, with lots of metal bits bonded either to the interior or exterior, and then lacquered, so you couldn't really even tell that it was leather. Okay, the leather itself offered almost no protection. It was just a substrate upon which useful materials were bound. And that is what this studded leather armor is supposed to be. But imagine for a second that I took a sharp weapon and stabbed at this leather armor, right? Am I just gonna maybe hit one of these tiny chinks? No, like, look at all this exposed space, okay? It would have looked almost nothing like this. However, for the sake of giving myself some sort of leather armor to use as I work my way up to frog leather armor, which again, probably wouldn't have existed in that traditional sense, we're gonna say that this armor is an example of a brigandine. Okay, a brigandine has similarities to this. It is leather with metal bits attached to the outside, and sometimes the studs that are holding the metal on the inside would be on the exterior, but the studs themselves are not actually for protection. They're just the screws or the nails that hold everything else in place. So when people say studded leather armor, they're not thinking of leather with metal studs attached to the outside. They're actually thinking of a leather material with metal on the inside. That's the reality of the situation. So that's what the leather armor is going to be for our case, because a lot of the metal pieces would not be on the outside. So when I get the frog leather armor, we're gonna say that it is a armor that has metal on the inside with a lacquered material on the exterior so you can't see it. I hope that's acceptable to all of you viewers. If you do have a problem with it, please go ahead and comment any other recommendations that you would make. I just wish that people would take a little bit more time to consider their creations when it comes to D&D characters or other fantasy elements where armor is concerned, because it's such a crucial concept, right? You play these games generally in order to get into combat, and then you ignore the basic pretenses of combat. Reality is sometimes way cooler than fantasy. Like, for example, I have never heard of anyone in Pathfinder using different types of ammunition for their cannon. Okay? Cannon are a totally legitimate thing in variations on D&D 3.5 or in Pathfinder, they're a thing that you can find in the world. Why are you not using sabot ammunition or using grape shot? Why do you not have a bar shot to take out the mast of a ship, right? Why are all the coolest things in real life removed for the sake of some magic cannon that shoots magic energy with magic ammunition that is poorly defined and has no basis in real combat? It just makes me so sad when people take the coolest things from reality and discard them simply because they don't understand them or don't know they exist. And while I'm talking about armor, let me just interject here real quickly. Thank you for everybody who voted on the use of Iron Man armor. I've decided, based on the comments, not to use the Iron Man armor, not just because it's useless at this point, but also because it's not really lore friendly. So we're gonna move on from there. Next poll. Should I use adamant armor? Originally I said no because adamant is not a real metal, but I did some research. Turns out the word adamant is medieval in origin, and it just means the hardest thing that we know of. Okay, it's an archaic term, that's why we use it today. We'll say, oh, I am adamant about this. What that means is that you're very hard, or you're very insistent upon doing something. Okay, so adamant armor is not necessarily not lore friendly. It just means we don't really know what this metal is, but it's harder than everything we know of right now. So it could be titanium, it could be a cobalt steel alloy, whatever. It is something that could be considered lore friendly if we want to take the etymological route rather than the historical route. So please weigh in the comment sections, either in Reddit or on YouTube, and decide whether or not we're going to open up adamant armor as an option for melee armor class. Thank you to everybody who helped make this a successful series. Okay, back to the video now. While I'm here, I also wanted to mention this very fantasy-esque signpost. You go to Lord of the Rings, you go to any kind of film or story, you're gonna see this signpost. It's a big wooden thing stuck in the ground with wooden arrows pointing the directions. Okay, it's very convenient, right? And it also didn't exist. Wood is a terrible material to make a signpost out of. Think about it. It's outside. Wood treatment didn't exist. Okay, so you would have had to cover this in some kind of tar or something to keep it from slowly rotting away. Not to mention that you probably would have had to have painted or carved your words into the sign, and that would go away over time. So unless you're talking about a sign that didn't have to last very long, at which point, why do you need a sign? Wood doesn't make any sense, okay? What did exist in medieval Europe were milestones. Those milestones, which is where we get the word milestone, so like if you say, oh, I reached an important milestone in my life, you're actually referring to the Roman signposts that were built on the Roman roads. Remember that the medieval era starts when the Western Roman Empire falls in 450 or so AD. A Roman milestone would exist at any major point on a road where you would need information. And those milestones stayed for literally hundreds of years and were used, and some still exist to this day on the side of roads in Europe. The Roman roads were the primary form of transportation and logistics during the medieval era. New roads would not be built towards the end of the medieval era unless they were like inside a city. Major transportation routes had been determined by the Romans, and they stayed that way for most of the medieval era. I realize I'm starting this video off with a really intense sort of tirade against the fantasy world as I'm trying to rationalize these concepts with the medieval character here. But, I think I was a little kind to RuneScape on my last episode. There were a lot of things that RuneScape did right. It's time to point out a couple of failures. This didn't exist until the 17th century, so this clock is literally 300 years ahead of its time. The pendulum clock was not patented or developed until the mid-1600s. Now this is something I just think is so cool. So look at these barrels, right? You look at this barrel and you think, yeah, that's a barrel. That's a wooden barrel with a steel hoop around it. It has pressurized contents with some kind of spigot attached to it. This barrel design is well over 1,000 years old. The Romans were using them to store goods, and the basic premise for this barrel design has not changed since. Yes, materials and manufacturing tolerances, blah, 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 blah. But what's amazing about these is that when the wood would expand, it would hit the ring, which did not expand, and it held the whole thing together, so you could pressurize these containers very, very well. So you could brew beer, you could brew wine, anything that had to ferment was amazing in these, and they were watertight, right? Because as the pressure increased, the wood would prevent anything from passing through. Even if it was just water, the water would seep into the wood and create its own lock, because the wood would expand from getting wet and it wouldn't allow any seepage. Some of the early writings we have on these barrels come from around the year 30 AD. So in a few years, this barrel technology will be at least 2,000 years old, and we still use it today, which is kind of amazing. Yeah, and I guess somebody probably cares about what my Iron Man stats are now. So let's just take a look at those. 24 ranged, 28 to use the Dorgashun crossbow, so I need a little bit more range there. 26 to use iron crossbow though, so I'm almost there. 24 defense, I need 25 to use the frog leather armor, so we are almost there. I'm just gonna use some long range while training ranged, and boom, we'll be there. And I've got some good news. Carved a gold necklace and gold ring. Actually, I had the gold ring, and we're gonna go complete the first step of the beginner clue scroll. Okay, we're in the shop. We just gotta equip the necklace, the ring, and we gotta blow a raspberry. Alright, what's up, Yuri? It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That is a quote by Captain Picard. Well, I mean, it's probably a quote by a lot of people. Cheer at Iffy Knitter, equip a chef's hat and a red cape. Well, I can get a red cape real easy because I'm right next to that store. I'm not sure where to get a chef's hat, but I'm sure I can find one pretty easily. Another critical Iron Man stat that we're going to need here is fletching. We only have 30 fletching right now, but we need 39 fletching to make iron bolts. That's going to be our second best bolt after the bone bolt that we can use on the Dorgashun crossbow. It can only use up to iron bolts. Okay, so everything down here, this is gonna have to be a story for another time. One thing that I do find kind of interesting about Varrock and some of the other cities is that they all seem to be in a state of disrepair. Okay, you'll see in almost every city cracks in the walls, broken down sections. You see these homes that are destroyed. Okay, one thing that you would see in medieval cities is that if there was a lot of history to the city, there were like old quarters or ruins or whatever, those sections would be cannibalized to build something else. And today, that's why we have lost a lot of history, is because people would say, oh, well, we're not using this thing anymore, so you know what, let's just take it down. Even if that thing is the Colosseum. Okay, yeah, even the Colosseum of Rome, as important as that was at one point, that was actually cannibalized. Huge chunks of that were torn down in order to use that material somewhere else. So, would you see these broken down buildings and stuff? Yeah, sure, because they would probably be reusing all of this material. Rocks are still rocks, despite how, doesn't matter how old they are, they're still useful. If you can't tell by my inventory, we're halfway through Monkey Madness 2. Okay, it's time for our goblin catwalk. Now I'm going to indiscriminately slay every goblin I see until I get a chef's hat. Alright, we have our beginner clue scroll gear now. Like some sort of super chef, Gordon Ramsay to the rescue. New clue. What do we got? Buried beneath the ground, who knows where it's found? Lucky for you, a man called Reldo may have a clue. Okay, well, we just go talk to Reldo. I don't know if I should be entering the palace armed, so I'm gonna take this off, take my hat off to be respectful. Feel strange device. Is this magical? Oh, this is so painful. You can sense strange powers emanating from it. I think this is magical, guys. I think we did all this work for this clue scroll, and he handed us a magical device. Ugh, I think we're gonna have to drop it. We're so close. This has to be the last one, because we go dig in the ground after this. Ugh. Okay, well, that's part of the task. We're not using magic, no magical devices. There's no way to write this off. It is a magical orb. I'm just gonna have to leave that clue scroll there. Okay, fletching level 39. I'm gonna have to say that's the end of the video. That is as celebratory an occasion as we are going to get after that devastating last clue step. So we can now make our iron crossbow bolts. That's gonna be our best weapon until we can get the Dorgashin crossbows. Next time we will be trying to get to our 25 thieving, try to get our agility up, and continue to train our ranged XP so that we are a force to be reckoned with. If you liked the video, please remember to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications so you can continue to watch the adventures of Iron Lateran as he explores RuneScape as a medieval-only Iron Man. Thank you.